everybody, welcome to the show. Hello everyone, welcome back to Raising A to Z, this YouTube channel all about homeschooling. My name is Amanda. I am a teacher turned homeschool mom, and today and all this month I'm going to be doing a whole series on reading. I feel like reading is one of those things that people panic about. Whether your kids are in public school or they're homeschooled, everyone is worried about getting their kids to read. How do you get them to read? How do you teach them to read? How do you get them reading independently? What should they be reading? What level should they be at? All those things. So this whole month, I'm going to be talking about reading and literacy. I'm going to be sharing my tips, my tricks, and my approaches with you all this month. And today I'm going to talk about why we need to kind of calm the panic around reading, and some different ideas on approaches you can take when it comes to reading, and what you might want to look for when you're looking for curriculums or when it comes to ideas about reading. That's what we're going to do today. But before we do that, why don't you guys go down and subscribe and then click the bell to get notifications so you can follow along with this series and get notifications when the next video comes out. I want to calm the fear about reading down. I know a lot of people are very panicked about reading. They're very worried about their kids not being at grade level when it comes to reading. There's a lot of panic, literally just panic about reading, getting your kids to read. Oh my gosh, my daughter is 7 and she's barely reading. Oh, I have an 8-year-old, he's really struggling. He can only read short sentences. There's a lot of really big fears around reading and their kids not reading. And I understand. Reading is such an integral part of our society. Not being able to read is really not a great thing. We do want our children to be able to read. It is essential in our society today to be able to read. So when you have kids who are not doing what you think they should be doing, it does make you want to panic. I understand that. I understand the panic around it. I also think it's a little misplaced because we've created a system where kids who aren't reading by a certain age are deemed behind, when really, academically, emotionally, and mentally, they're probably not. And the science supports that. Kids will start to read between the ages of 6 and 10, which, if you're thinking grade levels, is between the ages of 1st grade and 4th grade. Children will begin to learn to read. Let that sink in. You can have kids as old as 9 and 10 who are just starting to get comfortable with reading. And yet, we live in a school system structure where kids who are not reading short sentences and identifying words and, decoding whole things by the time they're in 1st grade are deemed behind. So in the schools, kids who are in 1st grade might be deemed behind if they aren't reading short sentences, starting to decode bigger words. They might be deemed as behind, when the science doesn't support that. Science tells us that children who are neurotypical will typically start to read between the ages of 6 and 10. But when you have a 1st or 2nd grader who is not super comfortable with that, what do we do with them? We put them into intervention programs in the school system. They get put into intervention programs where they get pulled out of class, often during subjects that are deemed unimportant, like music, art, science, social studies, gym, recess, and we make them sit with a teacher and go over reading structures and phonics and all of this to help them decode. And so now we have kids in intervention programs who are missing out on the things that make school fun for them. The art, the music, the creative side of things. And they're now being forced to do extra homework, extra work on something they already find difficult. And we're sucking the love of reading out before we've even taught them how to read. But what's the push? Why do we have such a push to get kids to read so young? It's because we're sticking them in classrooms of 30 kids. It's impossible for one adult to educate 25, 30 kids at a time if they cannot do some form of independent reading. Especially once you're getting into the 2nd and 3rd grade levels. If kids cannot sit down and read through some worksheets, if they cannot sit down and read through a textbook and find out what they're supposed to be doing next, there's no way for a teacher to walk 30 students through what to do next and through everything when they're moving at different speeds and different paces. That is why there is such a push in the school system to get them reading younger, is because if they can read younger, you can pack more kids in a room because they can do stuff more independently, which means you can have bigger classes, hire less teachers, and still kind of move people at a generally accepted rate of speed. So there is a push in the school system to get them reading younger and younger and younger, and really it's not supported by science. Historically speaking, reading and writing is a really new concept in terms of like human and societal evolution. It is a hugely new concept, and we're really seeing that this is an area where the science is telling us this is not necessarily the best thing for kids, to expect them to be able to read so young. The science doesn't support it. In fact, it says there is no benefit to reading early. One study even showed that kids who started reading at 5 and kids who started reading at 10, there was no testable, discernible difference when they were tested on the reading when they were 13. The kids who started reading at 10 caught up to the kids who started reading at 5. Kids don't learn on a linear line. They go up and down, they take off, they learn exponentially. We have to stop thinking of kids as this like linear model of thinking, and if they aren't here, they're not going to get here. If they're not here by a certain age, they're not going to get to where we want them by another age. That's not how kids learn. Some kids are going to kind of stall out for a little bit and then take off exponentially. We need to accept this about children, and especially for homeschooling, we have the ability to create environments where they can do that, where they can be themselves, learn at their speed, at their pace, and then encourage them when it comes to reading. So that's the first thing I want to talk about when it comes to reading. The second thing I want to talk about is the big debate in reading curriculum and reading education right now, which is balanced versus structured literacy. If you are in educational circles, you've heard the thing. If you're not, and this is new to you, sit back, relax, enjoy the show, because it's kind of wild. So recently in Canada, here in Ontario, there was a Human Rights Commission appeal that was put forth, and it determined that the Ontario curriculum for literacy was unconstitutional and that it was a human rights violation. Shocking. What does this mean? Why was this thing? So it became a thing because a few years ago, it was a long time ago, back when I was in teachers college, this was kind of a newer movement. It had been in the schools for a couple of months, a couple of years probably, but it was kind of on a newer swing. It was this whole balanced literacy approach, which essentially, I'm going to read it because it is a philosophical orientation that assumes that reading and writing achievements are developed through instruction and support of multiple environments using various approaches that differ by level of teacher support and child control. Although phonics, coding, and spelling may be taught, they are not emphasized. That's important, and are rarely taught systematically. Rather, students are encouraged to use word analogies, pictures, and context to identify words. The instruction balanced literacy is focused on shared reading, teachers reading to students and asking questions about the text. Guided reading, children reading at their current abilities in a group of peers at the same level, and having discussions with teachers. And independent reading, students selecting their own books. Let me break it down. Basically, balanced reading is the idea that as long as kids are reading, they will learn to read. Okay, so it's the idea that if they're being read to, they're going to pick up on grammar, structures, phonics, how to decode words, as long as they're being read to regularly. And as long as they're being moved through at a systematic approach with practice with peers at the exact same level as them, they're just going to learn how to read. The other thing that is huge about this program is that it is not using phonics or any word decoding method. It is primarily using things like context and look to the picture as your primary ways to decode words you don't know. So if you're looking through a text, the cat is in the tree and the kids are looking at a picture book and they don't know the word cat, they look at the next word, skip the word you don't know, is in the tree. and then looking at the picture that goes with it and saying, what is in the tree? Oh, it's the cat, and using the pictures to decode, using the context to decode, and using that to figure out what that word means. And even as a teacher, we were often encouraged to let kids, if they got something close to the word, for example, if they got the kitten is in the tree instead of the cat, as long as it's like a one-off, kind of let it go, because they basically got the idea, and that's all that's important. Does this work? For neurotypical kids, most of the time, yes. That's the thing. So for neurotypical kids, most of the time, they will learn to read and they will start picking up on the patterns of words and of word families and phonics and the grammar and all of that through a balanced literacy approach. They will use these strategies and it will help them, and they will become proficient readers through a balanced literacy program. Where it became a human rights violation is that it is not giving instruction for kids who are not neurotypical. So for kids who are not neurotypical, kids who are neurodiverse, kids with dyslexia, autism, other forms of learning disabilities, they are lacking, because of the way the brains are wired, they are lacking the ability to decode based solely on the system. Their brains need to be taught systematically how to decode these words. And because there is no emphasis on phonics or grammar or word structures, word families, things like that, they are missing that ability. And so that's one of the reasons why so many of these kids were struggling with reading, is because that was not something that the teachers were teaching or that they could teach. And so that became a huge human rights violation in Ontario literacy. So what's the opposite? So we talked about what balanced literacy is. Balanced literacy is over here. Structured literacy is the opposite. It is very much a systematic approach to word decoding. It's the idea that things like phonics, letter sounds, spelling, grammar, sentence structure, homophones, all those things that help people break down what a word is, that is structured literacy. It is a systematic approach to how to break those words down, not just memorization and reading and practice. It is systematically, how do you break this word down to make the sounds, to make the word. So there's definitely right now a push to kind of bring more structured literacy back into the curriculum in Ontario. And a lot of places are focusing, kind of starting to shift towards a more structured approach. Why? It benefits everybody. We like to think of it as having kids having toolboxes when it comes to reading, giving them as many tools as they can to understand the text. It's kind of like having kids try to build a tree house. One person opens their toolbox and they are the neurotypical kids and they have, a hammer and nails and a saw and a level, and they get to work building the tree house. The other kid opens up their toolbox and all they have is a screw. How are they going to build their tree house? Now, if you teach both people and you give them both screwdrivers and screws, this person can build their tree house now. This one can also build a tree house, but they have a choice of which tool they're going to use. Are they use the hammer and nails, or are they going to use the screwdriver? That's why structured literacy is great for everyone, is because it's giving everybody the tools they need. The person who needs the screws and the screwdriver to build their tree house, they're getting those because that's the only way they can learn. But the people who are neurotypical and can learn a variety of ways can actually make the choice of which strategy is going to work for them in that particular setting, which one they feel more confident with, which one they feel is going to be easier for them to remember. So it gives everybody more tools, but it's giving the kids who need those specific tools the tools they need. That's the difference, balanced literacy versus structured literacy. And I think it's something that parents can think about, especially if you have a child who is either struggling with reading or is neurodiverse. Definitely looking for a program that is structured literacy, that has a systematic way to approach phonics, letter sounds, grammar structure. That's going to help them in the long run. It's a little sometimes dry and annoying to begin with. Yes, it's giving your kids those tools as you're going along. Where do I sit on this balanced literacy, structured literacy setting? I sit kind of firmly in the middle. I think we do need to have those structured literacy practices. We do need to understand how to break down words. We need to understand letter sounds. I never, even as a teaching student, understood how kids were going to just learn through, it seemed like learning through osmosis. It didn't make sense to me. So I still definitely believe in a more structured literacy approach. I do like some of the elements of balanced literacy though. I do like the emphasis on being read to and the emphasis on just reading in general. I think that's where the structured literacy emphasis is kind of missing. They're so focused on getting all the tools, they're missing the opportunity to let kids build the wonky treehouse at times, going back to my analogy. So, and sometimes kids just want to build the wonky treehouse because it's fun and it's exciting, and letting them do that. I think that that's where we kind of need to meld things. So if you're looking for like what to do when it comes to literacy, I always encourage parents, you definitely put some emphasis on phonics. Put some emphasis on like word families and spelling, because that's going to start giving you the foundation. It's going to give kids the ability to see those letter groupings, the INGs, and making that connection that ING means ing, and that often when you see the ing, it's a verb and it means motion and action. Giving those kids those basic foundational understanding of how words are made is important. But also letting kids have that ability to read. And it's really easy to incorporate that reading aspect into a structured literacy program. So we do phonics, we do spelling with my kids. That's a big thing in our homeschooling world in my house. And then we do a lot of reading. We do a lot of reading aloud. I read a lot aloud to them, and we always have books that they are interested in reading, and letting them read what they want to read as well, and making sure that everyone is getting lots and lots of the reading aspect while still getting a lot of those like foundational elements from the structured literacy. So that is kind of how I approach reading. That's how there are the different schools of thought around reading. And I hope that kind of helps you guys understand what to look for when you're looking for literacy programs or literacy interventions or anything like that. We don't need to rush kids into reading when they're 6. It's okay if they don't pick up reading until they're 7 or 8. We should be encouraging them to learn some phonics and some of these more structured word and literacy foundations, but we also should be encouraging them to read and to love reading and love stories as well. So next week I'm going to do a whole list on some of my tips for encouraging reading and encouraging reluctant readers. So if that's something you have in your household, you'll definitely want to stay tuned for next week. Again, subscribe and click the bell so you get notification for that. And if you want to see what we're reading in our home, how we handle reading, you'll definitely want to follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next week.